I used to think secrets were always a form of dishonesty. But sometimes they're just a form of patience. For most of my daughter's life, there was one thing I never explained to her. A safe deposit box in a bank downtown, in one of those older buildings with marble floors and quiet hallways that smell faintly like paper and metal. She knew the bank existed. She'd been there once as a teenager, bored and impatient while I signed documents. But she never knew what I kept in the box. And I never told her. It wasn't because I didn't trust her. Quite the opposite. When you raise a child alone, trust becomes the one thing you build your life around. You trust that the long hours at work will mean something someday. You trust that the small decisions, saving, planning, keeping certain things in order, will quietly protect them later. The box was part of that. It had been there for years. Inside were documents, letters, and something I once promised myself I would give her when the time felt right. For a long time, the right time never came. Then she met Daniel. At first, there was nothing dramatic about him. No obvious cruelty, no loud arrogance. If anything, he was careful in a way that made people comfortable, polite, attentive. The sort of man who asked questions that sounded responsible. Where do you keep important papers? Have you ever thought about consolidating accounts? Do you still manage everything alone? He never asked these things directly about money, not at first. He framed them as concern. My daughter liked that about him. She said he was practical. I said very little. When you've lived long enough, you learn that people reveal themselves slowly, usually in the spaces between their words. The wedding happened quickly. Faster than I expected, though not unusually fast by modern standards. At the reception, Daniel gave a speech about partnership, about building a future together, about responsibility. Everyone clapped. I watched my daughter's face while he spoke. She looked happy. Not blindly happy, but hopeful. The kind of hope people carry when they believe life is finally settling into place. I didn't want to disturb that, so I kept the safe deposit box exactly where it had always been. And I kept the key exactly where it had always been. Months passed. Daniel began appearing more often in conversations about practical matters. Taxes, property, long-term planning. Sometimes my daughter would repeat his questions gently, almost apologetically. Daniel just thinks it would be good if everything was organized. I would nod and say it already was. Once she asked directly, "Do you still have that box at the bank?" I looked at her for a moment before answering. "Yes, what's in it?" "Things that belong to the future." She laughed at that, assuming I was being vague on purpose. I suppose I was. Then one Tuesday afternoon my phone rang. I was at home watering the plants near the kitchen window when I saw the bank's number appear on the screen. The manager, Mr. Rahman, rarely called. When I answered, his voice sounded tight. "Mrs. Khalid, I apologize for disturbing you, but there's a situation here." I set the watering can down. "What kind of situation?" There was a pause. "Your son-in-law is currently in the bank. He is insisting on accessing your safe deposit box." The silence between us stretched for a moment. "He claims," the manager continued carefully, "that as your daughter's husband, he has authority over family financial matters." I leaned against the counter and looked out the window. Across the street, a man was walking his dog. Everything outside seemed completely ordinary. "I see," I said. "He's becoming insistent." "I'm sure he is." Another pause. "What would you like us to do?" What Mr. Rahman didn't know was that the situation he was describing wasn't entirely unexpected. Years ago, when I first opened the box, the bank had asked whether I wanted additional security procedures. Most people said no. I said yes. There were two requirements for access: the physical key and my presence. Without both, the box remained closed. "Please follow the instructions already on file," I told him. "Yes, of course," he said quickly. "I'll come down shortly." When I arrived at the bank, the lobby felt cooler than usual. Daniel was standing near the manager's desk. He turned when he saw me. Relief crossed his face first, then something else, Impatience, perhaps. "There you are," he said. His tone carried the quiet assumption that the problem had now been solved. Mr. Rahman stood beside him, composed but alert. "I explained the policy," the manager said gently. Daniel exhaled. "Yes, but policies can be clarified. Families handle things differently." I looked at him for a moment. Apparently, no one raised their voice. That's the thing about institutions like banks. Conflict rarely looks dramatic there. It's mostly paperwork and quiet authority. Mr. Rahman led us into the vault area. The door closed behind us with a soft, heavy sound. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls. Mine was near the center. I took the key from my purse. Daniel watched closely. Up until that moment, I think he believed the box contained something very simple. Something measurable. Jewelry, perhaps, old savings bonds. Something he could categorize quickly. I unlocked the box and slid it onto the small table. The lid opened without ceremony. Inside were several envelopes, a thin folder, and a small velvet pouch. Daniel leaned slightly forward. "What exactly is all this?" he asked. I picked up the folder first and handed it to my daughter, who had arrived quietly behind us. She opened it slowly. Inside were legal documents, trust agreements, investment accounts. Everything had been prepared years ago. All of it was in her name. Not jointly. Not conditionally. Exclusively. Daniel frowned. "What does this mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "that your wife has had financial security for a very long time." My daughter looked from the papers to me. "You never told me. You never asked the right questions." The velvet pouch contained something smaller, a ring, not expensive. Just the small gold ring her father gave me before he passed away. She had lost it once as a child while playing with my jewelry box. She thought it had disappeared forever. I had found it months later and kept it safe. "For when you were ready," I said. No one spoke for a while. Daniel looked at the documents again. The structure was simple but clear. Access, control, protection. None of it depended on him. Mr. Rahman stood quietly near the door. The quiet authority of the institution filling the room without a single raised voice. Finally, my daughter closed the folder. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I considered the question. "Because I wanted to know something first." "What?" "Whether the people around you were interested in building a life or managing your assets." The vault remained silent. No one argued. We returned the documents to the box. When we stepped back into the lobby, the afternoon light had shifted slightly through the tall windows. Nothing outside had changed, but inside something had, not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough that everyone in the room understood the situation differently now. I walked my daughter to the door. She held the folder against her chest, thinking. Behind us, Daniel remained near the manager's desk, unusually quiet. As we stepped outside, she looked at me again. "You were testing him." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I was waiting."